Hey everyone, Niccolo here. I want to show you a different way to read, for now, data from Shopify in Ruby on Rails applications. If you ever built a Shopify app, you know that navigating the raw GraphQL query responses gets tedious really fast, especially when you have to deal with the connected objects, edges, nodes, and whatever you may find inside. Also, sticking to the query responses makes it really hard to reason about the entities at play, increasing cognitive load when you develop the app. Because the main advantage of GraphQL is querying the right data at the right moment for a specific purpose, in each place we might have objects with different shapes. Here maybe the variant might or might not have the SKU who remembers what we set up. We could abstract these different purposes in different classes, but it's always difficult to backtrack to what query originated what payload, making things not really obvious in the first place. Taking inspiration from ActiveRecord, I wanted to port some of these ergonomics that we all know and love to Shopify GraphQL handling. In this way, we can have stable domain objects that we can actually call models, that we can interact with and should behave predictably across the code base. Ready? Let's dive in. Here I have a sample dev store which I set up with the custom test sample data from Shopify, so we will see a lot of snowboards and ski stuff. Then I created a simple app, an empty app following the Ruby template that's given us from Shopify. And this is the default interface that we can see when we open the app from the store that we've installed into. Let's go look at the code, shall we? Okay, this is the app that we have open. I am in the web folder, so where the Rails application live. And to actually use this gem, it's quite easy because we can add it to our gem file. It will add some minimal dependencies. Also, to ease things up, I set up a simple helper in the application RB file, which essentially I will say in the console, okay, let's just pick the first shop that we have available so we don't have to deal with different shops, because right now for testing purposes we can take a look at only one. With this out of the way, let's see how we can actually start using this gem. First, we need to initialize and configure the gem to actually be able to talk to Shopify. And to do that, you configure the admin API executor. We do have another API executor, which is for the customer account APIs, but I won't show that here because it's a bit of an advanced use case for building customer account portals. But let me know if you want to see something more in depth in that part. So we can define the admin API executor, which takes a query and variables as keyword arguments, and essentially we forward these to a instantiated Shopify client that uses the active session that we activate in our console. So we should be good to go. This gem is about building models, so let's start building models. Let's go in the models folder, which as you may know, it's not only for ActiveRecord models, but every model. So we can define a product class, which subclass is ActiveShopifyGraphQL. Lots of classes here, but the one that we want is the model one. We can start adding the attributes that we want on this one. So similar to the schema, essentially. So attribute ID, because the ID is kind of useful. Then maybe we want the title. And this is pretty much the minimum that we can get. Let's see. Open the console, product.find. I have in my clipboard an ID of a product that I know of. Let's run the query, and apparently it's loading the videographer snowboard. Since this is a full-blown model or a full-blown Ruby class, we can do whatever we want. So we can even add instance methods, like the same way that we are used in ActiveRecord models. Essentially, we can define, is this a snowboard? So we can maybe say title match the regex for a snowboard, and it's case insensitive. Let's reload the console and maybe assign this to a value. It's gone to another query, and we can maybe check the title, the ID as just methods, it works. Product.snowboard, yeah, it's a snowboard. But of course, products support a lot of other attributes, but this information can be received directly from Shopify. So maybe I can add another attribute, which is product type. And in Rubyland, I can define it with the underscore case, but under the hood, when we query the GraphQL thing, it will be casted to these. So no handling of like underscore and camel case, the attributes, it's all done automatically. Let's maybe reload the console again. And automatically we will see that in this particular case, the product will get us also the product type because we asked for it. And of course now, since we can access the attributes, we can say maybe product type equals to snowboard. Let's reload again. Let's fetch it again and ask it if it's a snowboard, and apparently it's true. But why stopping at normal attributes? Because Shopify supports extending the data model with metafields. We can extend the products, variants, orders, customers, whatever, with metafields, which are just tiny attributes that we can define on the Shopify side. And of course, we can access them through this gem. Let's see how we can do. We can specify that we have a metafield attribute, which is called maybe only length, because I know that on the sample data we have the snowboard length metafield, and you need to specify the namespace, which is test data in this particular case, and the key is of course a snowboard length. Okay, the product, now it has more attributes, so we don't see them. And we can see that the metafield has been pulled in as a string, but apparently it contains some sort of JSON data. So how can we handle this particular case? We can add an option to the metafield attribute, and we can say that we want it as a type of JSON. So if we reload again and I ask it again, I will see that now the length is still not the best it can be, but right now it's a hash that I can actually query as a normal hash, and I of course totally what's that value, and I can get back the value. As of now we dealt with only one record at a time, but maybe we want more, so we can maybe do product.all, which are all lazily loaded. We need to specify when we want to load, either by accessing the data or actually saying, okay, load them all. So product.all.load will return the full list of products. If we have more than 250, it will paginate and get everything that we have essentially on the store. So use with care. However, maybe getting all of the products isn't really valuable to us, so we want to filter them down. And we can use maybe this particular syntax, which, by the way, it will use the search query syntax that forwarded in the query argument for the GraphQL connections in the Shopify API, which is a totally different syntax that you can see from the documentation. The gem doesn't care about the arguments that you pass in the where directive. So everything is forwarded to Shopify, and if it's not valid, it will be said by Shopify essentially. So I can say maybe product.where product type snowboard. It actually returns all of the snowboards, and okay, no, this accessories is a different query. Okay, it's working fine, and in fact I don't see the accessories. Let's see if it works with accessories. Okay, only one, that's fine, that's great. And let's try, maybe I misspelled something. This is a non-existing attribute, let's see what happens. In this particular case, we will raise an argument error because we didn't pass the validation here. Of course, there is also like the other all-encompassing method that we use and love on Rails, which is find by. Find by is just the equivalent of doing where and then getting the first one, essentially. So product find by will behave exactly the same. There is also like one other way that you can query the records, and it's by forwarding a string instead of a hash, where you can actually do some wildcat matching on the attributes that Shopify allows you to. So maybe I want all of the products that start with the, and it will forward this query, getting all of the products that start with the. This is unsafe because the hash syntax is sanitized and you shouldn't have like security issues by forwarding user provided input in the where attributes. However, be always careful about them. Instead, the string syntax like this is unsafe. So it's on you the burden of ensuring that what you are passing inside is safe. So please be careful. It's getting a little bit lonely, isn't it? We can, of course, add way more models that we want. So we can add maybe the product variant, since we are dealing with products. So let's open the console again. Let's maybe start with a product variant all.load, and it works. However, we can go a little bit deeper and actually connect these two models, because we know that products has many variants and a variant belongs to a product usually. So we can say that the variant has one connected, because in the GraphQL world there is no like I belong or I have many. So there is one connected, there are many connected, in my opinion. So I can say that has one connected product, and let's maybe let's get one at random. So I have this one, which is called Sunset. I don't know what product it is, and I can say v.product, which under the hood will fire a different GraphQL query, and it will get the product back. So it's the complete snowboard. And of course we can go the other way around, because we can say that products has many connected variants, and this is where it gets finicky, because on the products, to get the variants you need to call like the variants connection. However, the underlying GraphQL type is called product variant. How does it work? Because of course by convention it will try to load a variant class which doesn't exist. So we can specify which class we want to instantiate. So we want to instantiate product variants. So it actually knows what kind of attributes to load and blah blah blah. And because we are in GraphQL land, we need to supply other options, such as the default arguments. The default arguments are needed because I didn't want to like hard code some default arguments for the connections. I want developers to actually define whatever they like, and maybe we can say first 5. So when we query for the variants, we always query for the first 5 variants. We can even specify 250 or whatever, and we should be golden. Okay, let's try again. Let's reload the console. Let's do the same thing that we did again. So v.product, we got a different variant. It's called the archive snowboard. Okay, let's assign this to an object, so I can do p.variants. As you may have seen, the response time here was not the greatest, because we were running the same queries again and again, and of course it's something that's suboptimal. When we instantiate these connected objects, we can even specify to the gem, okay, when we load them, be sure to cache them in the connection cache of the associated objects. What does this mean? That we can actually use the inverse of directive, and we can say that's the inverse of product, which is the connection name that we have on the other side, and we can say inverse of variants. And also, if we enable the login, we will be able to actually see the queries that are being run in the background. So let's try again. let's get this one. So we have a variant called ice, which is stored here. It will run a query, and in this particular case, we can see that the output is more verbose because we know that this product, so if I actually assign this object to something, so P, has this connection cache. So I can say P variance, go back to the variance again, because I want. No underlying queries went on. On the connections, I want to show how we can leverage GraphQL and avoid like these particular n+1s, if you will, because if I do maybe the product equal, wow, product find this particular ID, which is like a product with many variants, which I think has 3 or 5, we can see that the product right now doesn't have variants. We can, of course, load them, and that's okay. But we made 2 network queries, essentially. What we can do is that if we know that we need variants, and actually we kind of know, we can even say, hey, please, instead of loading only the products, please load also this particular association. So I can say includes, straight up copied from ActiveRecord, so it's easy to remember. So product including the variants, we can get the specific product, and now when I query the product, I will see that the variants are already populated because under the hood the query has been run, and we can actually see all of the variants right here. So if I ask it, what are your variants? These are the variants. If I put these 2 files side by side, we will see that they have like at least some resemblance. Okay, the title, okay, but they all have an ID. We can pick a notion that has been taught us by ActiveRecord, which is the notion of the application record, and we can steal this idea and maybe create a superclass, a common superclass that we want to use in our application, which is maybe called application GraphQL record, which is a mouthful, and which subclass is the model. So we can actually subclass this and automatically have the ID, and in this particular case I wanted to have also the GID that's widely used on the GraphQL side. If we subclass from this one, I will show you in a little bit what that entails. We can remove the attribute ID here, so it's way terser. And what I did here was to define the ID as an integer, and to get this integer I use the transform option that takes a lambda. So we can define, okay, we get the ID, but instead of like keeping it as is, we want to like split it by the slashes and just keep the last one, then cast it to an integer. So we know that, as ActiveRecord does, all of the ID attributes are actually integers, which is easier to reason about. Then we can even specify that an attribute which we can call whatever we want, in this case GID. We can say that its value will be taken from the field, essentially ID. So we are essentially renaming the ID as GID. And if I save these files, open the console, maybe I can get this particular product again. I will see that the product now has the ID, the numeric ID, which is always ready to be used, and the GID as a string, so easier to be used. Of course, we talked a lot about inspiration from ActiveRecord, but what role does ActiveRecord plays into this? Because our Rails applications are made of lots of ActiveRecord models. Apparently, we can actually interact with them. I built this simple model as an example, which is just a rating used to like rate products, right? They don't belong to a customer, so it's just a test thing. and they have this particular attribute, which is called Shopify underscore product underscore ID, and the presence is set to true, so we can validate them, and we could have used an index on the database, but it's easier to see here. And then from the concern of the GraphQL associations, we can use the belongs to GraphQL directive, and that we can say that it belongs to a product. By convention, it will, of course, look for an attribute which is called Shopify underscore this particular name, and then ID. Let's see how it works. Okay, I should have a couple of ratings here. Yeah. Okay, 3 ratings. I can say that maybe rating dot first, this one, and I want to get its product. Because it's all connected, under the hood a query will be fired, so I get the product that's tied to this particular rating, which is the complete snowboard. And of course we can do the same on the other side. Let me close this thing because I need more space. I can say that a product has many, in this particular case only has many, so we are talking about ActiveRecord associations, has many ratings, which is exactly the same syntax that we expect. Okay, now that we have maybe this particular product, let's save it in, whoa, not a constant, please. Okay, this is the product, and then we can say what are the ratings that are associated with this product. Under the hood, we will use the ID because it's like used under the hood automatically. We can define the foreign key, the primary key, how we want. It will be used the ID attribute by default. It will be queried on this particular attribute of the ratings, and it returns the ratings for this particular product. Let's talk about another elephant in the room, because on Shopify stores you can define, the apps can define, the merchants can define meta objects, and meta objects extend the data model a lot. Right now we don't support meta objects, we will in the future. It's kinda finicky to implement them, but as of now, if you need, maybe you have a product that has a metafield which is a reference to a meta object, you can do that. Like, there is no actual abstraction for these meta objects as of now, but I've saved a little snippet in the README which should help me. Okay, let's paste it here. This particular attribute is called supplier because it's actually what I envisioned as the supplier of this snowboard. And since there is no native way of doing this, no comfortable way to do this, we support like having raw GraphQL as an input, where we can actually specify a bunch of GraphQL things right there that will be forwarded in the query. So we can actually ask whatever we want. And in this particular case, we are asking for a metafield, which references a meta object, and this meta object has these particular fields which need to be aliased in their own way. So at the end, we want in the supplier attribute essentially the reference of this meta field. And then when we get the reference via the transform lambda, we can actually transform this particular payload in something that's usable on our end. So if I now query again this particular product, let's load the console again, product equal product.find, paste the ID, it should automatically load also that attribute. And as we can see, we now have the supplier attribute in the product payload. It has the name that is picked from the payload that we are getting. So this particular name, this particular logo, and I am just like pushing them to an easier way to manage them. And this is done automatically on every record. So if we actually try this on all of the records, like we can maybe do product.all.load, we can see it will essentially blow up because all of the products have these metafield setup with this particular meta object. So we can actually use a safe navigation here, and we can do even like a different way, but right now it works, and it will have the supplier as name nil, logo nil. We can even decide, okay, if it's all nil, just return nil. It's up to us. This is just the beginning and read-only for now. Mutations are way trickier because Shopify doesn't have a consistent convention to handle mutations, but at the end we will make it there. And so if you enjoyed this walkthrough and you maybe want some more in-depth explanations, just let me know in the comments. And this gem is open source and available at the repo in the description. See you next time.